Welcome to my Need for Speed presentation. It's been an experiment I've been doing on my triathlon bike for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I wanted to summarize his results and make them available and offer this service to others as they would see the benefits. I think it's hugely interesting. I've been working on this Need for Speed concept since 2008 in one way or another. That's when I first started using my first time trial bike. And back then we were just doing 40K TTs down at Bond and locally just to fine tune fit and equipment. So it's been 12 years now of trying to have this need for speed fulfilled on what I would consider a TT bike if I wanted to go back to the day. So obviously there's a couple elements that need to be correct before we get into experimentation. You really want the best bike you can afford, the best equipment you can afford within reason. There is a cost per watt, and I do have a spreadsheet for that I can share if you ever would like to have a copy. But a bike fit is relatively low cost. A tri-bike is typically necessary for getting the fastest overall speeds. Things like having tight fitting equipment, a lot of things that we can do that are relatively inexpensive. And then when it gets to the wheels and the tires matter almost as much as the wheels, and not too many people would know that. Um, so having a good, lightweight, trustworthy tire, typically with latex tubes, would be your fastest combination. You do have to air up those tires each and every ride, so it's a little bit more work because the latex tubes will bleed out just a little bit more air. But you really want the right tire, the right tube at the right PSI setting. The wheels matter, so having a deep dish carbon wheel does make a difference. It makes more of a difference as we get to speeds over 15 miles per hour. So you have to at least weigh that into your budget and decide what you want to do for wheels. And again, my spreadsheet does a nice job addressing all those factors. So let's get more into this experiment and the results. So the Need for Speed experiment is typically focused on equipment. I feel my bike fit is good. My bike is one of the fastest bikes produced today, the speed concept. So what I really wanted to do for my goal statement was to quantify the change in speed by some affordable updates to my current tri-bike. I want to run the fastest stuff that doesn't create a new problem on a race day, like flat tires and anything that would be risky, like overheating because of wearing some sort of faster speed suit. These are things I do not want to do. So therefore, the potential factors that I ended up using in the experiment were tire pressure, 105 versus 85 psi. The lower pressure being a company called Silica Optimized. You put in your body weight, type of roads that you ride on, and it gives you the pressure. Oh, you also include the tire that you're using, a few parameters, and again, it gives you the optimal PSI based on very much so the expert in the field right now. It's a scientist that used to work for almost all the biggest teams in the peloton, the most successful teams in the peloton for Tour de France and other big races. The rear wheel, I had to choose in between the head disc wheel that I'm using with the Clement tubular tire, 25C wide, versus a set of new tires I just bought. They're 25C Continental GP 5000s on my 90 millimeter rear wheel. The one wheel that I kept the same throughout was the front. The chain is another factor that I wanted to test. So a new paraffin wax chain versus the current chain that had just a wax applied that's of a bottle versus the paraffin wax is dipped, the chain is dipped into a vat of melted wax. And then there's a little bit of a cleaning process that needs to happen before it's installed on the bike. The helmet, the Rudy Wingspan 57 short tail versus my old Bell long tail helmet. Both of those I use the shields. And the tri-suit, so the sleeve versus no sleeve extreme endurance tri-suits, one piece. The control factors I had for this experiment that I wanted to hold fixed throughout were power meter pedals that were properly calibrated. Front tire, again, I'm using that Continental GP 5000 25C. Using that throughout, I didn't want to change tires. The power output, the best I could, I kept it 235 watts. I only strayed a couple watts, actually. I think my lowest test was 233 average, and my highest test was about 238 average. The Yard Park 3.5 mile TT course with as many limited factors as I could, just controlling my efforts up and down the hills and just doing the best I could to ride the same exact way each time I did a tech track. Of course, tri-bike, the shoes, the helmet shields, no gloves, air bottles, at least partially full throughout, and the latex tubes. Those were all fixed factors. The less controllable factors, and I try to minimize these as much as I could. I do have a record of those factors, but they include things like temperature, wind speed, wind direction, and barometric pressure. Weather matters, so I picked 2 days that were very similar in weather, but there was a slight difference in wind direction and wind speed, but it was minimal. And last but not least, when I'm doing these TTs, I have to have no stops, no brakes and arrow, and really limit my braking. So just control the controllables. So the equipment, the 2 tri-suits, the 2 helmets, my bike with the different wheels, different tires. Pictures worth 1,000 words. And the results. So Minitab does a nice job of taking all the trials. There was actually 17 passes on the 3.5 mile TT course. Should have been 16, but I had traffic one time, so I had to redo that. I spent a total of 6 hours at Yard Park doing these time trials and coming back and changing equipment, and then about an hour analyzing the data. So definitely a lot of time spent, but I do this in I guess, the search for speed and database decision making. So the conclusions based on this experiment, the green circled points are the ones that made the most difference. Chain being the biggest impact on speed. As you can see where the green circle is, that's the wax chain, and that was the fastest. It had the less time. The time is expressed on the vertical axis, and that's in seconds for this time trial. So again, the wax chain was the fastest. One thing I'll say there is that waxing a chain is not easy, but it's relatively low in cost. And the time savings was approximated at 35 seconds per hour. So you could say that's a big deal or not a big deal, but that could be the difference in between, say, first and maybe third place on a sprint triathlon, and more so as we look at going the distance. So 70.3, let's just say 3 hours. Now you're talking over a minute and a half, and that's just for a wax chain versus a non-wax chain. So I'll run a wax chain. That was a little bit of a surprise, and a very good surprise, I guess, because that's something I'm willing to do on my setup. I have the time and I have the equipment to wax a chain at this point. The helmet, I had both these helmets, so it was a nice test to do. Came out to be about 19.25 seconds per hour. So again, definitely, I think that's worthwhile. 20 seconds almost, but I'll take that. for our hour-long race, and of course more as we go a longer distance. The bell helmet is a little bit warmer, so I do need to be careful of using that on the hot days, and I probably wouldn't use it if it was over 80 degrees or if it was very humid over 75. Last but not least, somewhat surprising, the wheels, the suit, and the PSI, the tire pressure, were really insignificant. They were less than 7 seconds per hour. And there was enough variation in the results, right? Some trials that went one direction and some trials that went another direction. That circled those factors in orange in the graph above. Pretty inconclusive, but the good news is I like all the settings that were at least somewhat faster in this test. So again, that's that wax chain as first, the long helmet, the bell helmet as second. And then when it comes to the third factor, that would be PSI. I can run at the 85 PSI and get less road shocks and vibrations. It's definitely smoother on a 25C wide tire. For the wheels, I will run the 90s, the 90-70 combination that came with my new bike. And I'll run those until I can change out my disc tire. One thing I learned by looking at the studies after the experiment was that the Clement rear tire, the tubular glued-on tire, it's known to be not very fast. It ranks quite poorly in the rolling resistance category. So I'm going to change that tire out and I'll redo some experimentation because I do think the disc wheel is faster and it's probably at its fastest when there's crosswinds. But at least for this experiment, I can comfortably use my 90s with my favorite tires at the right PSI, which is lower for me. And last but not least, the suit. The tri-suit didn't really matter much, which is good news. I like using the nose sleeve. It's got a better chamois, better fit, better material. I can save the sleeveless and use that maybe if it's a little bit cooler, but again, it's not much different in that category. So no sleeve, extreme endurance tri-suit for me. So all good news, I think, really helped me discern what I can and cannot use and how much flexibility I have when I'm trying to have that need for speed on race day. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being part of the Cycling Form and Fitness experience.